The war in the Middle East continues to rage as it's been going on since October 7th of last year. There continues to be so many conversations among senior American officials about having a ceasefire, about bringing the war to a conclusion, and yet nothing ever seems to get done. There doesn't ever seem to be a ceasefire. There seems to always be a problem. Some people want to blame Israel. Some people want to blame Hamas. But whatever people do, the bottom line is the war continues on. The Palestinian people continue to suffer, and the Israeli citizens continue not to have peace. We want to delve into today a little bit to find out what's really going on behind the scenes, especially. We really have nobody better to talk about this today than Ambassador Chaz Freeman, back on the show again today. Former State Department, former Defense Department official, former ambassador, and just a guy who really knows what's going on in the media. So welcome back again to the show, Mr. Ambassador.
Well, thanks, Danny. Actually, nobody really knows what's going on because nobody wants us to know what's going on. These talks have been described as ceasefire negotiations or hostage negotiations. They're neither. Ceasefire negotiation, nobody's asking for a ceasefire other than Hamas. And the ceasefire it wants is a ceasefire in the 76-year-long Israeli war on the Palestinians, which is intended to deprive them of their right of self-determination and self-governance. Yet what Mr. Netanyahu wants, he's been very clear about. That is, he wants to exterminate Hamas. By Hamas, he means uppity Palestinians, Palestinians who will not accept Jewish supremacy in their own country and who resist. So when he says he's going to continue this war until he's rid the world of Hamas, he means rid the world of Palestinians who object to being ruled by Israelis. And that's why it's going on. But we have acquired habits of negotiation in this context that are entirely dysfunctional. That's why, decades of the so-called peace process never produced anything. Nothing between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Zionism was founded with the objective of creating a country in which Jews would be the overwhelming majority and would exercise supreme power. From the very outset, over 100 years ago, the Zionist objective has been to depopulate Palestine so it could be what they originally claimed. The original slogan was a people without land for a land without people. Well, inconveniently, there are and were people there. And Israel's never given up trying to get rid of them.
And that's you say that it causes a lot of confusion in some listeners because they're like, wait, but I hear the government all the time talking, the U.S. government all the time talking about a ceasefire negotiation. In fact, here's how News Nation put it earlier today.
At this hour, there's a group of international mediators, including a team from all the way here in the United States, in the Middle East, back at the discussion table, trying to get some sort of a ceasefire deal back on the table. We expect these talks to last for at least the next few days. And this group really hopes to stop this war in the Middle East from expanding even more. Here's what we know about these discussions. Both Israel and Hamas actually recently walked away from the negotiating table, but a spokesman for the White House National Security Team says mediators stayed. And today they plan to hold more talks described as working group discussions. One of the biggest points of contention revolves around Israeli forces staying stationed along the border of Gaza and Egypt, even after a possible deal gets reached. You can see this area highlighted here in Gaza. It's on the border of Egypt and Gaza. Israel believes that forces could stop Hamas from smuggling in weapons, but Hamas has rejected that proposal.
Now, I wonder a couple of things there, Mr. Ambassador. First of all, if you could explain what is the significance of the Delphi corridor and why Israel wants it and why Hamas doesn't.
The Philadelphia corridor is the control point for entry and exit between the Palestinians in Gaza and Egypt. Under an Israeli-Egyptian agreement, it is to be controlled by Egypt. Israel has now taken control of it, and Mr. Netanyahu has declared that he will not relinquish that control. So he's violating an agreement with Egypt that is an essential part of the Israeli-Egyptian peace, originally formulated at Camp David many years ago.
So that's why does Netanyahu not want to let that go? Why will he not let Egypt do what its job, what they agreed to back at the Camp David Accords?
It's basically a declaration that he intends to exercise sovereignty over Gaza. He's going to control all the borders, including the ones with Egypt. That's sovereignty. In other words, no self-determination for the Palestinians, as I said earlier. The news report was talking about intensive peace ceasefire negotiations. These ceasefire negotiations resemble the so-called peace process negotiations. The purpose of those negotiations was not to achieve peace, but to prevent it, so Israel could continue to create facts on the ground, as it used to say. The purpose of these ceasefire negotiations is to avoid a ceasefire. And if you doubt that, consider a few facts. Every time there has been an apparent agreement in these talks, Hamas accepting, for example, the July 2nd White House concocted so-called Israeli proposal, Mr. Netanyahu adds additional conditions to ensure that there is no agreement. And all the time that the White House and American diplomats are talking about a ceasefire, we are supplying the weapons to bomb the Palestinians. So if we really wanted a ceasefire, we could easily get one, just stop the supplies. But we're not doing that. Instead, we're conspiring basically with the Israelis to continue the war. And that is obvious to everyone in the region. Hamas wants a ceasefire. It wants a ceasefire both in Gaza and in the long-term 76-year-old Israeli war on Palestinians. And it has accepted a ceasefire. The proposal that President Biden claimed was an Israeli proposal, which he put forward and which was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. Hamas accepted that. The Israelis then added additional conditions. And this is a classic pattern in this part of the world for American diplomacy. We come up with an idea for peace, and we take it to the Israelis, and they negotiate with us, and we make concessions to their objectives. And then we present the proposal to the Palestinians as an American proposal that we might be able to get the Israelis to accept. But it isn't an American proposal anymore. It's a joint U.S.-Israeli proposal. Or alternatively, we consult with the Israelis, they give us ideas, and we present those as an American proposal. But it isn't an American proposal. It's a joint Israeli-U.S. proposal. And if Hamas or whoever's on the other side, the Palestine Liberation Organization or other Palestinian leaders, as you know, there are 14 factions among the Palestinians. If they accept it, the next step is Israel adds conditions. So all of this is basically a cover for actions on the ground, whether they are implanting settlements in the West Bank or bombing and strafing Palestinians.
Well, and actually, that's it. I wanted to actually bring that point up because, and I think it's important for American viewers, especially, to understand the truth of this, because they keep hearing these statements over and over. And we're going to hear one from General Pat Ryder here in a few minutes about how we want a ceasefire. We're trying to work toward. We're trying to bring peace to the area. We're trying to de-escalate and all this kind of stuff. But then we literally do nothing when Israel destroys an embassy compound in Syria, or when they assassinate someone in the capital city of another country, when they assassinate the negotiating partner that they're working with, or as I see in the news this morning, Israel is now launching a larger incursion into the West Bank, actually, which is not getting a lot of press here, but it certainly is getting lots of interest there. So I wonder if these major events, and there's probably a dozen others that you could name off, what does this tell you about the reality of what Israel actually wants and what the U.S. is willing to do?
What it tells you is that Israel wants what it has always wanted. That is a Palestine free of Palestinians. What is happening on the West Bank now is under the cover, if you will, of the distraction of the genocide in Gaza, Israel is launching a major ethnic cleansing operation. It's trying to push the Palestinians in the West Bank out of the West Bank to make room for more Jewish settlement. And it is using very violent and means to do that. That's nothing new. The state of Israel was born in 1948 in a campaign of terrorism against the British, who controlled Palestine at the time, and the native Arab population. The Nakba, the great catastrophe that the Palestinians suffered in 1948, involved dozens of massacres and atrocities against them, intended to scare them out of their homes, to cause them to flee from their homes and take refuge in another country. 700,000 people fled in that campaign. Those campaigns have gone on ever since at one level of intensity or another. And that's why there are now 700-some thousand Israeli settlers occupying all the key points chosen for their military significance in the West Bank. And it's why there is a genocidal campaign going on 10 months in Gaza.
Okay, so
Nothing
let
has
me ask you
changed.
this. So there has been, at least officially, somewhere north of 40,000 Palestinians total having been killed since October the 10th, I think, when Israel first started going into the Gaza Strip. But there are a total of roughly 5 million Palestinians in it when you added the West Bank into it as well. And 40,000, still 5 million. Is there any rational possibility that Israel could somehow successfully eradicate or repopulate or whatever all these number of people? Because it seems to me that they're now 10 months, close to 11 months in, operating in the desire, as you say, and there's certainly evidence to that. But I don't see how they could possibly physically succeed in getting that done, especially when global public opinion still is going even stronger against them. But how do you see that?
Well, those are a lot of issues all packed into one. First of all, after October 7th, the atrocities committed by Palestinians escaping from the Gaza concentration camp in which they have been locked up for almost 2 decades. When that happened, Israeli officials said this is the opportunity for a second Nakba, meaning another mass expulsion of Palestinians. Take Gaza first. The figure of 40,000 should not be used. That is a figure that represented the people who were positively identified individually by the Ministry of Public Health in Gaza. Initially, it was derided by the Israelis as too high a number. Now it is held to, because the real number is probably something like 200,000 or more. That is the conclusion of international studies of this issue. This 10 months of bombing that is as intense as the most intense bombing during World War II on a very limited area with a hugely dense population have taken their toll. So there are probably 200 and some thousand dead. There are probably 100,000 wounded. And we don't know who's under the rubble. And Gaza is now almost completely rubble. So there's no doubt about the effort to depopulate Gaza. First, the Israelis tried to drive people over the border into Sinai and Egypt. The Egyptians wouldn't have that. Then they escalated to killing them, and now they're starving them. About 20% of the Gaza population is already on the brink of death from starvation. And yet the Israeli government, which excels at propaganda, says, oh, well, there's no problem with food there. It's just Hamas is stealing food. Well, this is really unspeakable lie. In the West Bank, you ask, how could they do it? The same way they're doing it in Gaza. And it looks to me as though Mr. Netanyahu has decided this is his opportunity to go down in history by having completed the depopulation of Palestine, so that it become an entirely Jewish state. I'm not talking, by the way, about the Arab Israelis. About 20% of the population in pre-1967 Israel is Arab, Christian, or Muslim. And they are second-class citizens. That is a system of apartheid. We're not talking about apartheid. We're talking about genocide by one means or another, whatever works. And that's why you don't get a ceasefire. Because if you had a ceasefire, that would mean recognizing that the Palestinians are there to stay. And Israel doesn't want that.
So let's keep with the theme of what Israel desires to do, and certainly that's the Netanyahu government, and many in Israel agree with that desire. How could it physically be conducted? Because you see, even if we use the highest number, 200,000 dead, 100,000 wounded, so 300,000 or so casualties out of still 5 million. I mean, they're nowhere near even meeting their grotesque goal. How could they even possibly do it? Because at some point, for that to succeed, there would have to be a mass exodus or a literal mass murder. And I don't think that anyone in the world could tolerate that. I don't know that even Americans could tolerate that physical depopulation. How do you see that?
Well, we are tolerating it in Gaza. Combination of bombing, sniping, and starvation, the destruction of the medical system and the hospital infrastructure, so there's no health care, is intended to depopulate Gaza. And, so you got to remember, Palestine's divided into two parts. Mr. Netanyahu, for a long time, favored aid to Hamas in Gaza to keep it that way. Now he's taking advantage of the division to try to finish off the Palestinians in Gaza. And apparently he's turning now to the other part of Palestine under Israeli control, the West Bank. And people can only take so much violence. The pogroms that are going on, the violence, Palestinians are being killed, being threatened with death, driven off their lands, driven out of their villages. The villages are being razed, the houses are being demolished. And now we have regular troops and bombing raids in the West Bank, which is something relatively new on this scale. So I think it's pretty clear that Israel sees a real opportunity to finish the job, as some politicians say.
Here's the compounding problem for Israel. In a minute, I'm going to get to what the U.S. claims it wants versus what it actually wants, and I think that's more murky than some people may think. But in terms of what the region thinks and what the global public's views, let's narrow that down to some of the regional views, which is a problem. Now, the United States is already worried about the war escalating and potentially with Hezbollah or with Iran, and certainly the Houthis, who are already doing what they can to try to gum the works up in support of the Palestinian people, but it's relatively low scale and something can be managed so far. The other part, though, could be more. So the U.S. definitely does not want a war, but we somehow also don't want to tell Israel no. Watch this interesting comment from Ryder. I think it was yesterday morning. It might have been this morning. I can't remember when it was recorded. But watch what he says, because there's something that seems to be really contradictory in his comments.
In two calls with his Israeli counterpart, Minister Gallant, this past weekend, Secretary Austin underscored the United States' ironclad resolve to support Israel's defense against threats from Iran and its regional partners and proxies. As many of you are tracking in support of this, the Secretary ordered our two carrier strike groups, the Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group and the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, to remain in the region. As we have been from the start, we remain intently focused on de-escalating tensions in the Middle East, while also remaining focused on securing a ceasefire as part of a hostage deal to bring all of the hostages home and to end the war in Gaza.
Okay, so I said there was a contradiction. There was actually multiple contradictions in that one little passage there, but we'll just look at them one at a time. First of all, he says we are keenly focused on de-escalating the situation as he sends another 2 aircraft carrier fighting groups throughout the region here. So those seem to be at direct contradiction to each other.
Well, I think he began by saying that we're steadfastly back the right of Israel to defend itself. But what Israel is doing is not defending itself. It's conducting a genocidal campaign in Gaza, and it is trying to accelerate ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. And meanwhile, it is trying to escalate the war. It wants a wider war. That is why it assassinates officials and bombs embassies in other capitals. And every time the United States urges Israel to rein it in, they escalate. So I think that is one contradiction. We are not supporting Israel's right of self-defense. We are supporting its right to conduct genocide and escalate a regional war. What is happening with the U.S. military presence? I think almost half of the U.S. Navy is now sitting in the Mediterranean, devoted to this problem. Iran is sitting back and probably laughing. They are taking their time to do what they're going to do. And in the process, they are exhausting us. That's their purpose. They are exhausting Israel, which cannot survive an indefinite war of attrition. Its armed forces are not configured for it. Its society is not geared to take it. And so I think the opponents of Israel know exactly what they are doing. And meanwhile, we're not seeking a ceasefire, despite what the Major General said. That is not what we are doing, as I said earlier. We are talking about a ceasefire. This is what I call paraplegic liberalism. That is, the head and the brain function and the mouth opens, but the limbs don't move. Nothing happens. Lofty talk and wretched inaction are the description of our policy. Or maybe you could call it wringing our hands while sitting on them. Anyway, whatever it is, it's feckless. And it is not a ceasefire. And in fact, when he talked about the ceasefire, it was only in the context of the hostages. But there's a war going on between Israelis and Palestinians. It's been going on for a long time. We used to want to try to make peace. Now all we want to do is get some hostages out so there can be a pause in the extermination campaign that Israel's conducting. We've come a long way, and it's not a pretty sight. And as you mentioned, the regional reaction, in the middle of all this, one of the fascist extremists in the Israeli cabinet, the national security minister, Ben-Gvir, says, well, he's going to build a synagogue in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which prompted Saudi Arabia to denounce him and Israel for that kind of ambition. I think you can forget the other part of the Biden administration's effort to appease domestic American opinion by brokering a Saudi-Israeli normalization. It's not going to happen. And Mr. Ben-Gvir would never allow it to happen. And so I think we've seen a total collapse of U.S. policy and influence in the region. Nobody in the region believes anything we say.
Yeah.
And Major General Ryder is a fine man, I'm sure, but people react to the sort of statement he made with disbelief.
Yeah, and I want to get into some of the other statements that the U.S. is which contribute to the very destruction of our influence, as you mentioned. And I want to ask it from a slightly different perspective. So I'm going to show you here what Biden said during the State of the Union address, and then what presidential candidate now, Vice President Harris, said at her nomination meeting conference last week, because there's some important things that are said in both of them, and it kind of lists out this really big aspiration, which I don't know if it's totally disconnected from reality or if it's just a desperation to, gosh, I wish we could make this happen. But in any case, what I want to try to look at as you watch these is, what does America actually want? Because I think that there's some confusion even within the senior leaders on what they actually want to accomplish. First of all, let's take a look at this at Biden. And I think that there's something he's going to say right at the beginning, which you're going to have a big issue with. Let's watch.
This crisis began on October 7th with a massacre by a terrorist group called Hamas, as you all know. 1,200 innocent people, women and girls, men and boys, slaughtered after enduring sexual violence. The deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and 250 hostages taken. As we look to the future, the only real solution to the situation is a two-state solution over time. And I say this as a lifelong supporter of Israel. My entire career, no one has a stronger record with Israel than I do. I challenge any of you here. I'm the only American president of Israel in wartime. But there is no other path that guarantees Israel's security and democracy. There is no other path that guarantees that Palestinians can live in peace with peace and dignity. And there's no other path that guarantees peace between Israel and all of its neighbors, including Saudi Arabia, with whom I'm talking.
So we'll just start with the first part, that apparently history started on October 7th. What do you say?
That's absurd, of course. This has been going on since 1948 in one form or another. And the sadistic torture of Gaza has been going on for 19 years now? It didn't start on October 7th. That was a jailbreak. It was a jailbreak from a jail, which makes Abu Ghraib look like a paradise. So that's nonsense. And then the endorsement of the two-state solution, when Israel has explicitly now rejected that, and you're just pretending that the Israelis are open to that idea. They're not. They have made that abundantly clear in the Knesset. Mr. Netanyahu has made it clear. His whole career has been devoted to preventing that. And, now he's trying to do that by ensuring there aren't any Palestinians left to have a state. And then there's this paean of praise for Israel as a democracy. Well, it is a democracy. It has been a democracy for Jews. It's much less democratic under Mr. Netanyahu today than it was. It was an admirable democracy with a lot of free speech and civil rights for its citizens if they were Jewish. Second-class treatment if you're not Jewish. But the main point is that democracy is managing a tyranny over Palestinians who have no say whatsoever in the day-to-day affairs of the areas they inhabit, and no voice in their future. That is a tyranny by definition. And finally, he takes credit for preserving peace in the region. What peace? It is true that the only peace that Israel has ever achieved, cold peace, with its neighbors, was as the result of American diplomatic initiatives. Israel has never put forward a single proposal for peaceful coexistence with the Palestinians. And the only peace that it has made with its neighbors is notwithstanding its abuse of the Palestinians. Is there peace now? Is that what we're preserving? What I see is exchanges of fire between Israel and various neighbors while the murders go on in Palestine, in Gaza and the West Bank.
Okay,
This
so
is not peace.
that's the objective reality that you're describing there. But now we have the president trying to manage perception on top of that. But he also has to figure out some kind of course of action that can be sustained even from U.S. domestic political perspective here. So is it possible that, first of all, I'm going to assume that Biden, at least to some degree, and certainly those in his administration, are aware of all the realities that you just talked about there. They're aware of the reality that Israel is doing everything it can to sabotage any possibility of even a ceasefire, forget about a peace. But America also has its own interest here. Is it possible that the Biden administration can be aware of this, but because of the election coming up, they're going to continue on with this dance of fiction, maybe do something later? Because if not, the question is, what does America actually think that it can accomplish for itself in this whole sea of violence?
You just asked a remarkable question. What's in it for us? What we hear is what's in it for Israel. Israel first, not America first. And what we are being subjected to is the most intense campaign of gaslighting that you can imagine. Mr. Netanyahu's speech to the Congress demonstrated the extent to which this has succeeded. Apparently, members of Congress, maybe the White House has some idea of what's happening. Members of Congress don't appear to. And, I think everything is treated now in partisan terms. If you say the wrong word, you're deplatformed. You can't speak. This is just the First Amendment is pretty much a dead letter when it comes to Israel. The campuses are about to go up in flames again, I guess, or have peaceful demonstrations. The university administrators are enacting rules which make any criticism of Zionism equivalent to anti-Semitism, even when Jews criticize Zionism, which, to their credit, more and more of them do. So I think the gaslighting is going to go on until November 5th and beyond. And why? Because you put your finger on it. Our politics are dominated by Zionist interests. Way back in 2001 or so, I don't remember the exact date, there was an argument between Ariel Sharon and Shimon Peres. And Shimon Peres was opposing a move by Sharon on the grounds that it would jeopardize the relationship with the United States. And Sharon on camera said, "Don't worry about the Americans, we control them." And when it comes to questions involving Israel, I think that is not inaccurate.
Okay, so that's self-evident. So that Biden now, that was his State of the Union address, but he's no longer running for the Democratic convention. So his term will come to an end next January, and somebody else is going to take over at there. It's either going to be Trump is going to return, or it's going to be Kamala Harris. And to get an idea where she is on all this, what a shock. Not too much different than what the Biden administration, but there's a key thing that she says here I want to talk about. Here's what she said during her acceptance speech last week.
President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Okay, so that last part there, they're trying to, the Democratic Party especially is trying to thread the needle, if you will, to try to not make the Israeli lobby unhappy and all the money that they provide in there, but also that there's a significant portion of their voting base, the Democratic voting base, that is very much for Palestinian people and don't like what's going on there. And you heard those are raucous applause there when she got to the part about how we're going to bring the Palestinian people peace and all this kind of stuff. Now, the reality is obviously rather different because it seems to me that those are just words that she's trying to just keep everybody safe or satisfied so that they don't lose any of the votes. But is there any possibility that if she wins, that she'll have a different policy towards Netanyahu?
One would like to hope so. And clearly she's trying to cause people to hope so. But this is the classic pattern of lofty talk and wretched inaction right there. There's nothing in her statement either about Israelis or Palestinians that you can really disagree with, which means that it's a statement with no significance. That is where we are. I think, from a political point of view, leaving aside the amorality of all this, that's probably a good stance for her to take. Why should she get into the middle of this if she can avoid it before November 5th? Unfortunately for her and for the Democratic Party and for our country, I don't think she can avoid this because there are now enough people in this country, most of them young, I gather, many of them Jewish, people of all backgrounds, people of color, people of faith, who see what's going on and find it utterly intolerable. The world finds it utterly intolerable. Whatever happens, whatever the outcome of this campaign of extermination against the Palestinians, Israel is not just a pariah in the eyes of the world, it's an outlaw. And the United States is in lockstep with it, and it is doing incredible damage to our credibility and our influence. And it's also, by the way, I have to say this, because some Jewish friends of mine have been very much affected by this. Association with Israel, which is common among American Jews, less so than before, is stimulating anti-Semitism. There's no doubt there's a rise in anti-Semitism in this country, and people are right to be concerned about it. But the cause, ironically, is Israel. Israel was established as a country to be a safe haven for Jews and to be an antidote to centuries of European anti-Semitism, which culminated in the Holocaust, the absolute worst atrocity of the 20th century. And it is having exactly the opposite effect. It is resurrecting anti-Semitism. It is fomenting it. It is jeopardizing the position of Jews in Western societies, where they have been a very respected, justly so, component of life, contributing a great deal to the United States, for example. But complicity, support, unreasoning support, and the imposition of a requirement to support Israel on all Americans is alienating non-Jewish Americans.
Now, you have ably discussed some of the Israeli focus on they want to get rid of the Arabs and the Palestinians in particular in Israel, and that's kind of one of their objectives. But one of their secondary objectives seems to be that they want to take opportunity, like was happened on October 7th, gave them the opportunity to try and actually expel by whatever means the Palestinian people. It also seems to have given them an opportunity to turn their sights to Hezbollah in the north of the border there in Lebanon and Iran. And towards that end, there are those in America that seem to want to help them do that, most notably Jack Keane.
Iran is behind what is happening in the Middle East, and there's no walking away from that. It's appalling that the administration doesn't confront them directly. But even when it comes to the nuclear deal, the Iranians have blown off the IAEA inspectors who are charged to go in and routinely look at the nuclear enterprise inside of Iran. They've destroyed the cameras that the IAEA has left in place. They don't want any part of some kind of a deal here. They're close to weaponization themselves, and that's the reality of what we're facing. This is a diplomatic diversion and a bit of grandstanding that's taken place by likely the new president is forcing this because he wants better relationship with the West.
Well, it was outside agitators who caused all the problems. The fact that the Palestinians are being dispossessed, tortured, murdered does not justify their doing anything. And clearly they are being manipulated by Iran. That's complete nonsense. I notice also that despite the statements about Iran's nuclear program, neither the CIA nor Mossad nor the International Atomic Energy Agency believe Iran has an active nuclear weapons program. And so they are getting closer to it. Yes, they are trying apparently to achieve nuclear latency, which would enable them to have such a program if they made the decision to do so. But they don't have one. So this is a diversion. Keane charges it's a diversion. His statements are a total diversion from what is probably the biggest moral issue we're likely to face in the 21st century if we're lucky.
Now, and that's the issue with Iran. So obviously, many in the United States, John Bolton being another one, Lindsey Graham being another one, who have just been lusting for war with Iran, and it seems that one could maybe make the argument that they don't want to let this quote opportunity go by to finally take some action. You actually heard Keane say, "I don't know why the administration is not taking on Iran directly." even though that you can't just go to war with somebody because you don't like what they're doing. According to the U.S. Constitution, that implies we're following the rule of law. But what is the biggest issue behind wanting to take out Iran? Or is this just part of Israel wanting to get rid of everything in the entire region that they don't like? How do you view that?
Well, in the end, Israel has an objective not only of emptying Palestine of Palestinians, but dominating its region. You know, there's an army patch that some people in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, wear, which shows a greater Israel that includes parts of Egypt, northern Saudi Arabia, all of Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, up to the Euphrates in Iraq, part of Iraq. You know, this is, for religious Zionists, this is the land that God promised the Jews. Well, if I were living next to a country that had that kind of a very belligerent declaration of intent to take my land, I would be rather concerned. So I think on the Israeli side, there is a positive agenda of genocide or expulsion of the Palestinians and a progressive takeover of a larger terrain in the Middle East. From the American point of view, I would say this is this whole issue, the whole issue of Israel, Palestine, and our failed policies in the Middle East are a microcosm of a significant strategy deficit that we have. We have no strategy. We have an attitude. We have emotional commitments. And in the case of Iran, this goes back to the fall of the Shah, the Islamic Revolution, and the taking of American hostages in the American embassy, which basically tortured the American people throughout 1980 and probably tipped the election to Ronald Reagan. So, you know, this is on the Iranian side, of course, there's an equal resentment of our overthrow of the Mossadegh government back at the beginning of the 50s. A democracy, by the way, we overthrew it because it was attempting to lower the share of the British in Iranian oil profits. So there are a lot of resentments on both sides. Grown-ups, you know, figure out how to get over emotional tantrums and don't act on them. We have a lot of people in our political establishment apparently who are unable to do that.
Yeah, well, that's an understatement. There's very few things we seem to be able to do except for make boisterous statements. We don't seem to have any thought or strategy or even objective what we want to get. I think you said it well. It's like an attitude. In the last bit of time we have here, I guess this is kind of keeping in line with a lot of the non-reality things that are going on. I'm going to show you a clip, and I'm not sure what prompted it, but this is a clip from earlier today by the Israeli UN ambassador, I believe, complaining about what the UN didn't do on October 7th, which is going to be a bit of an eyebrow raiser. Watch this.
The facts are that the UN was not able to condemn the atrocities of October 7th. That's, you know, I cannot accept that. You know, not the Security Council, neither the General Assembly, not even a small, short condemnation, zero, nothing, silence. That's unacceptable. And it shows the double standards of the UN when it comes to Israel. I think we should reform the UN, and I expect the US to lead the action to change the UN. I think the UN is an important organization, and we have to reform it and make sure that the UN will focus on the real objects of promoting security and peace, and not becoming a platform for hate and incitement by radical countries.
And of course, Gary, throw that headline up there. From October the 7th, Secretary General strongly condemns attack by Hamas. So when he says nothing, not a single thing, and I'm like, what planet is this guy on?
Well, this is part of the effort, successful in the main, pitched to Western audiences and reflecting internal opinions in Israel, to lie, to deform the truth, to deny the facts, and to rally supporters of Israel abroad to it. Now, the problem is the reason that public opinion internationally has turned against Israel has nothing to do with the impotence of the UN and everything to do with Israeli behavior. You cannot conduct genocide openly. By the way, the Nazis conducted genocide, but they concealed it. We didn't really know about it until the end of the war, when we liberated European Jews from the horrors of places like Auschwitz. Actually, the Soviet army did that. And Israel is doing this right out in the open for all to see. Of course, our media self-censor, so we don't see what the rest of the world sees, unless you go on some social media, or occasionally the alternative media, which have emerged to serve a fundamental purpose, because we live in a society now in which the truth is not allowed to come out. Anything that contradicts the official narrative, and there's a master of spin there on the screen, this anything that contradicts the official narrative is ruled out of order and may lead to the deplatforming of whoever said it. We can't have rational policies based on delusional views of reality, but those delusional views are now officially inspired and reinforced, not just by Israel, but by our own establishment.
What is the cost to the United States and to, I guess, global security if this kind of gross distortion from reality continues on unchecked? Because it seems to me that at some point, whether there could be a war exploding with Israel and Iran, Israel and Hezbollah, that could get us dragged in, that could possibly also drag in Russian help, etc., and could turn the whole thing into a flame. It's just hard for me to see that the status quo can be maintained, where Israel can continue perpetually to get away with this, and then eventually just depopulate the Palestinian people, and then they live and reap the benefits. It's hard for me to see that, but what else is possible? What do you think?
I think I'll have two comments. One, Israel is imploding very clearly. The military are at odds with the prime minister. The intelligence services are also at odds with the prime minister. The ultra-Orthodox are resisting conscription into the army. The hostage families correctly charge Netanyahu with having basically applied the Hannibal Directive to their loved ones. The democracy, the independence of the judiciary has been under attack. The democracy is threatened by autocratic methods. For example, last Sunday, when Israel attacked Hezbollah and Hezbollah responded, an order was issued that no damage reporting whatsoever would be allowed in Israel. Actually, both the Mossad headquarters and the headquarters of the equivalent of the National Security Agency in Israel appear to have been hit, as well as, and a large part of the Iron Dome infrastructure taken out by Hezbollah. Not a word from Israel. No truth. No democracy. This is typical of what happens in war, and Israel is now in a war of attrition. The second point I would make is we've already seen the international community for the first time acting through the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court in The Hague. These were institutions established to prevent the repetition of the horrors of World War II, including genocide. They were enacted largely in response to the great injustices done to European Jews. And now we have the descendants of the victims of the Holocaust carrying out their own Holocaust in Palestine. And the world is against this. So now we have an active effort in the International Criminal Court to issue warrants for the Prime Minister and Defense Minister in Israel, as well as some Hamas figures. We have the possibility that the International Criminal Court, which has ordered Israel to cease and desist, will find a way to implement that. Of course, we blocked that in the Security Council. We are completely complicit in this, and everybody sees it. So the pretense that we had of being the champions of some sort of rule of law internationally, a rules-bound order, if you will, are now completely destroyed. They have no credibility. And we find that the very things that we created the post-World War II system to prevent are coming back. And who's leading their return? Us, with Israel, our great friend in the Middle East. This is a grave loss for the world as well as for us and Israel.
You know, I think one of the reasons, Mr. Ambassador, for I guess this cognitive dissonance across broad spectrums of the United States public opinion is because it's just hard to imagine. You just touched on it, that the victims of the Holocaust are now, at least partially, and some of them are responsible for the beginnings of a new one. And on my recent trip to Europe, I took my family to the Dachau concentration camp just outside of Munich, which is the fourth time I've personally been there. It's the first time I took them with me. And you see all of those things, and it's, graphically portrayed there what happened to the Jewish people in Europe at the time. And it's just horrific. Even still, the fourth time I've been to that, I also went to Auschwitz. So I've seen a number of these, and it still gets me every time I see it. And even I had to stop and think, how is it even possible that the offspring of these victims are now the perpetrators? And I think you just can't get your brain there easily. And I don't think Americans have been able to get there. But one wonders if one day something could happen to change that.
I think it is changing. But we're seeing a major demonstration not only of gaslighting, as I mentioned, but of almost infinite human capacity to deny the realities that are unspeakable. The realities of the Holocaust are unspeakable. The realities of what is being suffered by Palestinians under Israeli rule is also unspeakable. And just as the world knew, there are people out there still who deny the reality of the Holocaust. There's people out there now, many of them in our country, who deny the reality of the genocide in Gaza. And it's the same phenomenon. This is why so many people in Israel, people of conscience, have emigrated and gone abroad. There are 2 million Israelis with second passports. I suspect many of them are figuring out where they're going to go. And the other thing I didn't mention, of course, is the Israeli economy is cratering. You've had 46,000 bankruptcies and small business closures. About a third of GDP has disappeared.
Oh, wow.
We've had to pump over $40 billion into keeping Israel afloat. And, it can't go on like this. And Israel is destroying its credibility internationally. Its rating in the by Fitch and others has been reduced. Still not. It's still pretty respectable. But how is Israel going to repay all the debt it's running out? This is why I say, Palestine may turn out to be where Judaism went to die.
That would be a tragedy for everybody, for all the reasons. Well, listen, we really appreciate you coming on today, Mr. Ambassador. Even if it's a tough situation and a tough topic, it's something that needs to be out there because, as you pointed out, a lot of the mainstream media are not even covering some of these issues. And as ugly as some of these things are, people need to know about it. And we really appreciate you providing such clarity. Thank you.
I won't say it's a pleasure.
I appreciate that, and I agree with it. But we do appreciate you guys coming on because it's just something that needs to be known. Feel free, and please do share this with your friends, folks, because it's not getting out there enough, and we want to help it. But do join us back here, actually, in about an hour. We're going to have Doug McGregor back on. We're going to look at what's going on in the Ukraine because there's cognitive dissonance going on in the Middle East. There's another version of it going on in Europe right now with the Ukraine front is starting to collapse in the east. At the same time, the Ukrainian president says he's got a victory plan he's going to share with President Biden. We'll be talking about that at 3 o'clock today. Be sure and join. If you haven't joined us so far, like and subscribe to this channel. We will see you in about an hour with Doug. Goodbye.